Hello. So after watching this video, my overall reflection of what I thought is just that this video was really eye-opening for a lot of things. One, I never really considered that when a child doesn't see themselves in literature, they think that's how it's supposed to be. I know that that is not how it's supposed to be, so I guess I never really thought about it from that way. I also didn't ever truly think about what a single story meant. Um, this video kind of allowed me to reflect on some of the ones that I have had or I do have, and just how to address them and what it truly means. Some of the elements of this discussion that I see in our current environment, I related it back to stereotypes. Specifically, older generations thinking my generation is lazy and always associating all of us with laziness. And that's kind of one of those single story examples that show the misconceptions and the dangers of that misconception. Whether that is about a whole group like my generation, a single person, or just a family. For question 2, how does the idea of a single story show up in schools? Who are centered and who's often left out? I related this back to the master narrative in social studies and how my specific example is Christopher Columbus. And, we've all heard Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and the story of how the Native Americans went through this and what they were feeling when they went through this time period is typically always left out. I do not remember learning about the other side of things in elementary school, or when we learned about Christopher Columbus for the first time. It was kind of just a lighthearted topic rather than learning the true history of both sides of the equation. I've also noticed this in ELA students who are white children, or white nuclear families are often represented in children's literature or even higher literature. It's most of the time different races, ethnicities, abilities, or disabilities are left out of books, and I've noticed that books that represent these different things are harder to find than books about white students. It's most of the time you would have to specifically seek out a book about a different ethnicity or a different disability in order to find a book that fits the curriculum. For example, I had to find a Native American book for a reading standard, and it was a lot harder than trying to find just a typical book that represented a white student. Also, it kind of helped me realize, this video helped me realize that these issues aren't only seen in the United States. She was talking about how even where she lived, it was kind of an issue of only seeing the white nuclear families reflected in children's literature. Question 3, how does systemic racism and gender disparities influence education? What examples? I think these factors affect the way a student performs in the classroom and also outside of the classroom. There's a lot of times different expectations placed on different students based on race, ethnicity, gender, and I think this is an issue that educators need to work on. It's kind of an implicit bias that we've placed on some students. And it does affect the way a student performs if they're being expected to perform less than or more than other students. Some of the examples that I see in media and the news, I'm going to relate this back to her video because immigration has become such a hot topic again, and it typically always is a hot topic. But I have associated it in my mind with a specific ethnicity, and I didn't realize that was part of the single story until she mentioned it, and then I kind of had to reflect on why I thought that and how the media and the news really put that into perspective, or made my perspective change on that topic. Something that I personally experienced was when I was working at my community college as a part-time farmhand. It is typically a male-dominated field, and so I was faced with a lot of questions regarding my abilities to actually complete the job. So that's just one example of how gender disparities can be seen in even situations like that. Question 4, in what ways can education and therapies be responsive to the cultures and needs of diverse populations? Number 1, I relate this back to the chapter that we just read, but eye contact and signs of respect. Eye contact is my specific example of that. In our culture, it means that we are actively listening, and in other cultures, it could be a sign of disrespect. So, understanding that these respect cues are not translated through every culture. Also, tapping into a student's culture by facilitating activities that reflect their lives or their cultures. And this kind of also just has to do with getting to know your students and what their lives look like. Also, allow students to see their language in the room, whether the student is an English learner or if they're using sign language or whatever it may be. Allowing them to see it in their environment, in their everyday environment, is going to make them feel a lot more comfortable and welcomed. Question 5, if I was teaching a K through 12 class today, what's one specific thing I would do to include more voices and stories? One of them would be having students share their culture and their lives with the class through story or personal storyboards. So I'd have them make a little poster of things that they identify with, maybe stuff about their culture. They can do research on it if they need to. I would have to about, German heritage, maybe look up my last name, and then we would do probably something like a gallery walk. And this kind of just allows students to see how similar and different they may be from their peers and just learn about different cultures in a more natural way, and something they can really connect with since it's people in their classroom. Also, the place where I see the most significant disparities in school, I think of academic tracking a lot. I just learned in my multicultural education class that students of different ethnicities and races are often affected by academic tracking in a negative way, and they're often discouraged to take higher classes like AP classes and stuff like that. So I think that is a big example of how it's seen in the classroom. Also, teacher implicit bias. We may not realize it, but some teachers have their own biases based on gender, ethnicity, race, the family a student comes from, anything like that. And it really affects the way a student performs because of those expectations that a teacher is placing on them, or the lack of expectation the teacher is placing on them. A specific action I can take to ensure that I recognize and reduce the disparities in my future classroom is just to create an open and an honest environment where my students feel comfortable to talk about things that make them uncomfortable or talk about their culture in a way that everyone is going to be accepting and understanding and willing to learn about a different culture or a different way of living. Also, just make students aware of the different cultures out there. Make sure they're understanding both sides of the story, like Christopher Columbus and the Native Americans, and make sure that they are being accepting and we address their misconceptions before it becomes an issue in the classroom or in the school environment.